So you can still be on the same page of your notebooks, your GA notebooks, where you did the diagram, or you can start on your newer page. Just make sure that you have the date on top so that we can find your notes. On whichever page you choose, it could even be, paper, and you're just going to copy your notes, take a picture of them, and put them into your GA notebooks later. Whatever. Um, you're going to reflect on the quote that you see here. It says, "We do not inherit the earth from our ancestors, we borrow it from our children." I'm going to pause the video so that y'all can reflect, read it again, think about it. What do you think about it? What do you think other people think about it? What do you think it means? Who do you think wrote it? And put that into your GA notebooks. Make sure you write incomplete sentences. Alrighty, so to me, when I read this quote, I think about my own child now, or I think about you all before I had a child, right? This earth does not belong to me. Instead, it belongs to the children. So I treat the earth like a gift, not one that was given to me, but rather one that I am going to be gifting to someone else. And just like if I'm baking you a cake for your birthday, I'm gonna make it real nice. But if it's a cake for me, I'm gonna be like, whatever. Like I'm just gonna smush it in my face anyway. Um, when you treat something as though it doesn't belong to you, but it belongs to somebody else, somebody that you care about, then you treat it more nicely. So that's what the quote means to me. It could be entirely different for you. Um, what did you guess about the origin of this quote? When I do research, I find different sources attributed to it. Some have said Chief Seattle. I've also heard or read Native American proverb, which I don't really like the term, but um, instead I just think of it as ancestral or indigenous wisdom. When you treat a place right, um, like it doesn't belong to you, like you're borrowing it from somebody else, then you're going to treat it better than you would if it was yours. So if you recognize the place in this picture, then you've probably been there. Yosemite is a place that is hard to forget. It's also the place that is considered almost the birthplace of environmentalism, or at least the birthplace of the environmentalist movement. And there's a reason why. Before we get to it, I am going to ask you to take notes, so feel free to pause if you need to write some of this down. I would recommend just writing down the stuff that is highlighted in yellow. Hint, there's a quiz later, so write down the stuff that is highlighted in yellow. Um, as I was saying, Yosemite is the birthplace of the environmentalist movement, but that ignores all of the indigenous people that lived in Yosemite for thousands of years and lived in harmony with nature. And what better form of environmentalism is there than to live off the land and to not negatively impact the land, to use what's in the land? That wisdom, that knowledge got erased because of the dominant narrative, which says that environmentalism started with a white man named Galen Clark in 1860. Galen Clark came to California, had heard about this place called Yosemite, which had just been discovered like 8 years before. Mind you, indigenous people had lived there for thousands of years. So Galen Clark gets there and he's like, yeah, this is beautiful, but we need to protect this place. Protect it from what? Who does it need protecting from? He writes to the president at the time. In 1864, the president of the United States was, if you said President Lincoln, Abraham Lincoln, you're correct. Because at this time, there was civil war, right? South fighting the North over slavery. There's a lot going on. And yet President Lincoln gets this letter from Galen Clark, gets this picture from Galen Clark that shows Yosemite Valley. And he's like, yeah, I'm going to sign this Yosemite grant. Let's protect it. And so they set aside money for the army to come in. And now the army comes in. And what do? They protect it from indigenous people who have made their home there for thousands of years. And so they kick out all of the indigenous people. The next white man to come along is considered the godfather of environmentalism. His name is John Muir, and you can see him in this picture right here. So, John Muir was born in Dunbar, Scotland. He moves to the United States. He's an explorer. He's working at a sawmill in Wisconsin or one of those states up there. And there's a sawmill accident. And the sawmill accident forces him or causes him to go blind. Remember, I asked you at the beginning, would you rather be blind or deaf? He's blind. And as an explorer, as a naturalist, as an outdoors person, that's like his worst nightmare. And so he's spiritual, and so he prays to his God and asks God to restore his vision and makes a promise. If my vision is restored, God, I'm going to travel the world and explore your creation and protect your creation. And so, guess what? A year later, he's not no blind. He gets his sight back, and so he hears of Yosemite, goes to Yosemite, um, finds it protected, right? But he's like, no, we need to protect more of it, and so he extends the boundary, like walks around, draws maps, and extends the boundary, and is credited with um, the current boundary of Yosemite National Park. Um, so cool. He helped to create a national park, but at the same time had really racist thoughts about the indigenous people that lived there, the Miwok, and kicked them all out and did not protect their rights to that land as the people that lived there. So that's the start of environmentalism. And I think this whole story of the erasure of indigenous people, as well as the fact that two white men started it, is one of the reasons why we don't like to identify as environmentalists, because the dominant narrative pretty much started with racist beliefs. So then there's a lot that happens in the world that takes away the attention from the environment and national parks. There is World War One, the Great Depression, World War Two, the Vietnam War, right? There's so much going on that people are just trying to live. Oh, there was a pandemic in there too. The Spanish flu, right? That was in there. Did people care about the environment? No. At that point, they were just trying to be alive and eat and live and breathe. Um, and worried about their families, kind of like now, you know, where it's hard to focus on the environment because of all of the other life threats that are happening. And so it wasn't until the 1960s, early 1960s, that Rachel Carson started the modern day environmentalist movement. And the modern day environmentalist movement was all about trees and animals and hug a tree and no nukes, peace, love, save the whales. But it didn't include people. So she's credited with jumpstarting that movement because of her book called Silent Spring. In Silent Spring, she wrote about pesticides and how, yes, they're poisons meant to kill pests from crops, but poison doesn't just kill pests, it kills lots of other things. And at the time, they didn't know about like how the strength of poisons could travel up the food chain to us. And so in her book, she combined poetry as well as science, and it really spoke to people. And they were like, yes, this makes sense. We're all connected. And so because of that, we had our first Earth Day in 1970. But still, that didn't include people, right? And again, like some folks don't like to identify as environmentalists because they don't care about the environment. Cut to the 1980s, where environmentalism isn't just about trees and animals, it's about people. And I think the reason why we don't like to identify as environmentalists at times is because we don't see ourselves represented in environmentalism. How many of you recognize that man? Okay. That man is Dr. Robert Bullard, who started the environmental justice movement. So he's the godfather of environmental justice. And environmental justice is about ensuring that all people have access to healthy environments, not just healthy access to healthy parks around them, but that their environments, or like this building that I'm in, I'm considering a part of my environment, that I have access to fresh and healthy air, fresh and healthy water within my environment. So if you can think about environmentalism as keeping you safe in your home, then maybe, just maybe, it's easier to consider yourself an environmentalist. Like, do you want clean water? Do you want clean air? Um, Great, then you count as an environmentalist. And that's not my quote, actually. That's Dr. Robert Bullard's quote. He actually did research and coined the phrase environmental racism, where where people in power use pollution to keep another group, ethnic group, sick. Um, do they do it on purpose? Yes, they do it on purpose. Why do you think there are no landfills or factories in Beverly Hills? I hope you're still watching, because I'm sure you know the answer. Dr. Robert Bullard studied a few different examples of environmental racism. Here's one example. This is in Warren County, North Carolina. And there's a town in Warren County where the population is overwhelmingly white. However, in the little part of town where the majority of Black folks live, um, that is where they are dumping toxic chemicals. So here you see the trucks leaving the white part of town and driving to where Black folks, African American folks live. Um, and people were fed up, not only because it's not fair, but also because people were dying and developing cancer and learning disabilities. And so a group of people, primarily moms and their kids, housewives, got together and decided they needed to do something. Signs don't always work, right? You can stand and hold a sign and they're just going to drive around you. But are they going to literally drive over you? That's what these folks said. They said, you may as well kill us right now because these toxic chemicals are killing our communities. Another example of environmental racism comes from the city of Vernon, California. Um, Let me show you what Vernon looks like. Uh, so we see some trees here, and we see that their seal says exclusively industrial. And in fact, they meant it. Here, the city of Vernon, which is just south of downtown LA, has 0 parks and 0 green space. Yes, it's right next to the aqueduct, but if you've seen the LA aqueduct, it's all cemented. It's also right next to the major railroad, so there's a lot of pollution that comes from that. And it's also surrounded by highways, and lots of trucks come through here. So the air quality is already terrible, but it gets worse. This battery recycling plant, known as Exide, um, knowingly emitted lead and other toxic chemicals into the atmosphere, like the government air pollution checkers. I think there's an actual job called that. Um, would fine Exide year after year, and year after year, Exide was like $20,000 fine. There you go. $60,000 fine. No worries. Meanwhile, in this town or city where 250,000 people live, the rates of cancer, brain cancer, and learning disabilities is huge, to the point where I'm not even gonna I'm gonna let the next video, I'm gonna let you watch it and hear from the town residents themselves.